Renacita's problems seem to have been fixed with 2.2. Well, at least one of the main overarching ones that was a cause for misunderstandings and all that. But boy, is there still a lot of work to be done, and let me tell you why. It's because of culture and society. Let me explain. Renacita for the past 10 to 20 years at minimum has been manipulated and rooted into believing a certain set of beliefs. It was one that was essentially obsequious to a false god, and upon that altar, a foe yet simultaneously very real foundation took hold, like you when you're gooning, and only strengthened over time. In fact, we say 10 to 20 years, but this corruption started ever since the first Dark Tide under Napoli, and potentially farther back if we take into consideration the Transgressors transcripts, which outline in more detail the founding of Ragunna and the start of the Order and the Fisalia family. That means this deep-rooted invisible control from the Threnodian has been going on for ages at this point, which means the people over generations have been conditioned into believing something that wasn't true. It wasn't until the past 10 to 20 years that this plan and mindset was escalated and hardened due to the Second Dark Tide.
I fed upon the trust, adoration, and longing heaped upon thee by the masses. Thy resonance brought forth the Second Dark Tide.
The Second Dark Tide. It occurred right here at the Avenolium, the largest seminary ever built by the Order. It arrived on the very day the Blessed Maiden passed her trials and was crowned by the Order. A day when belief burned brighter than ever. And when the darkness came, none escaped. These days, what most people remember is the seminary disappearing into the sky. But in truth, the dark tide that should have spread across Renacita vanished along with it. Yet due to a lack of records, the Second Dark Tide slowly faded from memory.
This brings up the problem, the restructuring and reprogramming of an entire civilization towards what is true. Despite the Threnodian threat being gone for now, that doesn't mean the damage that has been done is over. You still have an entire civilization of people who have a false idea of what the Order is and who their god was. On top of that, while the Fisalias have been given respite from Imperator telling them they're free, are they? Did Imperator's last breath imbue the populace with the truth or clear out the Dark Tide's curse that's been leading people towards the endless abyss? If you ask me, the Fisalia family are still far from free considering how far the rumors have spread of them, and how long this has been going on and reinforced. Not only that, but unless Cartethyia can somehow prove herself as a blessing from divinity as the new Holy Maiden, who's going to believe her if she backs up Cantarella and the Fisalia family regarding recent events? Will Fenrico or the current Order grant grace to them and move aside and submit to restructuring their ways? And hell, what about the banished people? Like, the Montelli Alvarado Vault was, and I'd assume still is, being used as a makeshift prison or asylum for non-believers. I can't imagine how many people not only died, but have already been sent out on pilgrimages. If they come back, I do not doubt that it wouldn't be a quiet one, and if the Order just apologizes, that all will be well. You have an entire troop of people who have been upended and sent away, families who have lost loved ones. If they come back or are welcomed back in, I can envision some kind of civil upending of the Order as they abused their power for the last at least 2 decades, killing many in the name of a false divinity. I say this because, well, it just makes sense to me, and also Bardolino and Brant Troop and Sanctuary for Branded Fools lets us know they won't simply take the false silencing of their voices. Take a listen from this little snippet.
Anyway, I'm just an old relic now. But you lot, you're the main characters of this era, facing down every obstacle with fire in your bellies.
But isn't our fate already sealed? Without the so-called salvation the Order preaches, we're doomed to our banishment. Just lost souls, dying in obscurity.
Life is short, and we weren't born just to atone. The Order may banish us, but they can't take away our right to sing. Death is one of many possible ends, but it's certainly not the worst. Perhaps being forgotten is what the Order wanted for us.
They want to erase all traces of our existence, grind us into dust and drag us into the abyss. But we'll fight the tide and live our lives to the fullest.
There's still a lot to be seen in Ragunna and a lot of accountability for the injustices that were enacted at the behest of a malevolent force. Obviously, my best guess for fixing this is Rover, but I hope they don't just have them be the default answer or the face of why Renacita's belief or societal outlook changes. I would find that generally kinda lame, and would hurt the thematic portrayal and reason why Rover is even roving in the first place. It takes more than just one person to change the mind or direction of a civilization. Sure, it can be kickstarted by one or be attributed famously to one, but there's other parts that need to jive with it, I think. My hope too is that since the things that I listed aren't everything, Kuro takes their time to think this out, even if it's on a revisit back to Ragunna. I'm not expecting all of the answers this patch, but what I am expecting is to have these questions start to pop up as the next few patches come by. It'd be cool too if new or different NPCs came out in Ragunna or the Fool's Troop or Riccioli Islands talking about the recent changes and stuff like that. It would help aid in the world feeling a bit more alive and whatnot. What I hope for them to implement is more interesting, I think, and more realistic. Since Ragunna is seemingly now more open, this can be the key area in how we see Ragunna shift. First off, this is more grounded in it actually happening, and it is happening, and secondly, it opens potential for conflict on both smaller and larger scales, while moving Rover to the side to not have them be the only key for change. This is because of the nature of people bringing in different things when visiting or living in new areas. It can be both positive and negative. This could be an opportunity to hint at future areas too, like imagine we find someone who's visiting from the famous Penn Island. Jokes aside, there's one study actually that I want to reference for my point. The study comes from 2018, which takes a look at France's immigration and perceived threats from them under the guise of national identity and acculturation. And I think from that small little descriptor you can see how this can relate heavily to Wuthering Waves at this current time. Before I start on the thrilling stuff of studies, I need to fondle your ball hairs real quick. Acculturation. Acculturation is defined as this from the Merriam Dictionary: cultural modification of an individual, group, or people by adapting traits from another culture. But I would like to point out that I think the Merriam Dictionary doesn't fully capture it, and I think this 2015 study that I thought I was going to use does a better job at defining it. Since I know gacha players don't read, and it's literally the first sentence of the abstract, thank god, the authors define it as dynamic and multidimensional processes in which individuals and groups change over time when coming into contact with another culture. I like it because of the inclusion of dynamic and multidimensional, reminding me of the hyperreal. No, but seriously, I think these additions are important. And it emphasizes the idea of cultural contact, which is what I did with your mom on March 14th, causing the blood moon. In Wuthering Waves terms, think as if the lion dancers in Jinzhou mutually borrowed cues and methods from Ragunna's Carnival after making prolonged contact with them, and vice versa. Maybe even picking up some manners, speaking habits, perspectives, or imbuing their traditional hate for pizza tropicale. Ling Yang showing off those kinds of things while still being comfortable with his Jinzhou cultural foundation would be an example of acculturation. By the way, no, this is different to something like assimilation, which yes, it is cultural change, but it hinges on the rejection of your home culture in favor of the one you're aiming for, and is typically a unidirectional transaction between the two, meaning you're absorbed into it with no prospects of really going back to it. It's like a one-way street and can involve pressure to conform. That'd actually make for an interesting video. But maybe another time though. Moving on to the study real quick, France. If Saruwe is any indication, they're freakier than I may want.
You know, and I'm like, hey, what's up, man?
I commend your protesting style though. France has an interesting approach to its view on immigrants, meaning, at least according to this 2018 study, they assert that based on past studies looking at the treatment of immigrants, it doesn't look too hot. This is in part due to a combination of immigrants being seen as a perception of threat, and that perception being linked to national identity, and how that influences prejudice. This path model will do a better job at giving visualization for this. The aim of this study was to understand those links, and it delves into how national identity leads to threat perception, and how immigrants can either assimilate into culture, which remember means to blend into their culture and essentially drop your home one, or allow the culture to be melded with the national identity, creating multiculturalism. To me though, one of the more important aspects in relation to Wuthering Waves is this section here that talks about hierarchy enhancing or hierarchy attenuating. What that means is that you can either enhance the hierarchy, in this case assimilate and promote an even more dominant national identity in France, or you can attenuate or weaken it by having multiculturalism be maintained within this structure, promoting characteristics of other groups. This study points out that, quote, consequently, endorsement of assimilation is associated with higher levels of prejudice, while the preference for multiculturalism is linked to less negative intergroup attitudes, end quote. Alright, come on, keep up with me, we're almost there.
Jingle, jingle, pay attention, pay attention.
With all that from the study in mind, I'm tying this to Wuthering Waves for the fact that Ragunna has been more or less a nation that is strict in their teachings and their outlook on how to operate in Ragunna. Literally one of the first things you get informed of before you officially start in 2.0 is the Bloom Bear report, talking about the do's and don'ts in Ragunna, as well as how they culturally operate in regards to worshipping divinity. Also, Alto lets you know of that too. And with what we know now, the unpleasant times revolved around sending you to fucking die. So I would say that if any kind of immigrant wanted to live in Ragunna specifically, they would have been taking a stance of assimilation and would be pressured to conform to Ragunnese national identity in a way which rejects the home culture. However, with the Threnodian musk now hopefully being cleaned out just in time for spring, it leads me to ask if the cultural outlook will dissipate with it. My guess is that it won't, and that it could tie in with what I was talking about before, with the society and culture being set and hard to readjust now that we know the truth. I think once we finish up in Renacida, we'll be leaving pretty big upcoming tasks to be handled between Cartethyia and Cantarella. Renacida, you're killing me here. All of that is to say that Ragunna has a lot of avenues, much like Rover's selection of potential mates, and is most likely going to leave us with a nice handful of questions that will probably be answered later down the line. I think the biggest and most interesting way would be to tackle it via the Acculturation angle because of what we've seen with Ragunna so far, but obviously in a more subtle kind of way. You know, as part of the job of a great video game experience, it's creating existential and fundamental questionings of what you interact with in real life, but being slyly covered via sexy video game characters. I mean, it's done a pretty good job at it so far, and with the ideas they have so far, I think that will only get bigger. I mean, good lord, just look at Cantarella, she's an example of that in more ways than two. In any case, hey, wake up, the bell rang, class is over. If you found this mildly interesting or boring enough to put you to sleep, don't forget to sub for my future classes where I tackle the tier list of most smashable weapons. Spoiler alert, Yinlin's weapon is winning handedly. Of course, thank you for letting me take your time, and be safe out there.
The people of this island came from diverse civilizations now lost to time. But through plays and tradition, they sought to preserve memories of their heritage. In the past, while the clash of cultures led to conflict, the Ragunnese united through faith. restoring balance, even if precarious.